Welcome to this week's episode of Rookie Roulette. I'm your host, Tyler Metcalf. This week is a really good one. We have Rookie of the Year frontrunner Stephon Castle and the San Antonio Spurs. In a few minutes, Matthew Tynan will be joining me to break down both Castle's rookie season and some really fascinating kind of subplots with the Spurs to keep an eye on going forward. So stick around for that. Before we get to that, just a little bit of housekeeping. And I want to kind of dive through where Castle is and has gone throughout the season. But it is March Madness week. We have a ton of content over at NoCeilingsNBA.com. Maxwell just put out a massive, and really excellent kind of preview piece diving into everything. So if you need a refresher, who to watch, teams to follow in love with, prospects to keep an eye on, go over to NoCeilingsNBA.com and check that out. Also, we will be doing live shows in the mornings, basically every day, reacting to the previous day's games, previewing that current day's slate, what to keep an eye on, winners, losers, biggest performances, all that good stuff. You can find that on the No Ceilings podcast feed. It'll be posted after we record. But we will also be live over on the No Ceilings YouTube page. So make sure go subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff over there to make sure that you don't miss anything. All right, on to the main event. Stephon Castle. He was the fourth pick in the 2024 NBA draft to the San Antonio Spurs. Coming out of UConn, coming off of a national championship. He ended up at 3 on the final No Ceilings collective big board. He was 1 on my personal board for quite some time. And the comp that I kind of always went to, if things went really well, like ultimate outcome for him was like a Jimmy Butler-esque player. Currently, Castle is at least a minus 900 favorite to win Rookie of the Year. Even worse odds, even more of a favorite on some other sites, depending on where you look. But he's pretty much the overwhelming favorite to win it at this point. I was lucky enough to cover a couple Timberwolves games where the Spurs were in town, so I've seen Castle in person twice this season. The first matchup was an absolute disaster. He was horrible. Looked uncomfortable. Game looked too fast for him. He got torched whenever he was out on the court and barely played that night. Then just a couple weeks ago, I got to see him again, and he was a totally different player. In that first game, I had asked Coach Johnson what's kind of stood out with Castle throughout through that early portion of the season, and he referenced Castle's ability to just kind of be thrown into the fire and take whatever responsibilities that they were just kind of throwing on him because based on injuries and kind of a whole rotating cast of issues, Castle had to do a lot quicker than what they were hoping for. It sounded like, based on what Coach Johnson told me at that time, was they wanted to bring him on a little slower, but given their circumstances, they kind of had to throw him into the fire and ask a lot of him. Early on, we didn't see that necessarily. The last game that I saw him live, he was incredible. The change it out, I get into this a little more with Matthew, but his rim pressure and the speed of the game on both ends of the floor, it was already so much slower. So he looked like the guy that we saw coming out of UConn, the guy that I thought was worthy of being the best prospect in that draft. And he looked really good. So on the season, Castle is averaging 25.7 minutes, 13.7 points, 3.1 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 0.9 steals on shooting splits of 42.7, 28.1, and 71.9. Post All-Star break, the numbers are a little more encouraging, depending on which ones you look at, but he's still averaging 26.4 minutes, 16.6 points, 4.2 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.2 steals, and shooting splits of 44.8, 25.8, and 67.7. We knew the shot was a big question coming into the season. It remains that way. A lot of the advanced numbers in terms of scoring efficiency and shooting, they're not great. When we look at cleaning the glass, he's in the 22nd percentile at his position of combo guard. In effective field goal rate, he's in the 19th percentile in 3-point frequency. He's in the 14th percentile in 3-point percentage. We knew that was the issue coming in. It still is because guess what? rookies don't typically change their shot all that much. They have other things to be worrying about at this stage. But we're seeing the aggressiveness improve, the willingness to shoot, and that offensive versatility that we saw coming out of college, where Castle is really stood out on the offensive end is his rim pressure. He's in the 94th percentile at his position in at rim shot frequency. He's in the 59th percentile in at rim finishing, in the 95th percentile in shooting fouls drawn at 14.5%. So he's getting to the rim constantly. He's doing a pretty good job of finishing once he gets there, and he's implementing the strength, the recklessness, the craft to draw a ton of fouls once he gets there too. So that's something, especially these last couple months, that has really stood out with Castle's game. But the key aspect of this, while Castle is an important building block going forward for the Spurs, the only one that really, truly, ultimately matters is Victor Wembanyama. Now, obviously, Wembanyama got hurt with the DVT, blood clots, and is out for the season, but we still got a decent sample size of how Castle fits with their primary guy going forward. With Victor, they played 1,604 possessions together with a net rating of plus 1.5. In the 1,805 possessions without Victor on the court with Castle, there's a minus 9.7. Pretty big difference. But when we look at the three most common lineups of Castle and Wembanyama on the court together that had 366 possessions, 348 possessions, and 127 possessions. Those three 5-man lineups had net ratings of plus 12.3, plus 11.3, and plus 15, respectively. So long term, I think there are a lot of compliments in how those two fit together. Matthew dives into giving us a little more detail on that as well. But Castle has had a really interesting rookie season and has had to do a lot. Before we jump over to my interview with Matthew Tynan, let's pull up the wheel. Let's figure out who we're covering next week. We're getting late into the season, so not sure how many more of these we have left, but next week, Wizards. That should be a really fun one. Stars had some massive performances recently, but until then, let's jump over to my interview with Matthew Tynan. Special guest joining me this week to break down Stephon Castle and his rookie year and the San Antonio Spurs. He is Matthew Tynan. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time. First, how's it going? And also, just before we dive into the nitty gritty of Castle's season so far, tell everyone where they can kind of find your stuff and how they can support the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Hope you're doing well. I'm doing well and ready to talk a little Stephon Castle. You can find my work at the Corporate Knowledge newsletter. It's actually matthewtynan.substack.com. And I got a podcast of my own called Small Market Bias. So if you're looking for the audio version of my thoughts, you can find those there.
Love it. Everyone go support Matthew. He does really good work. And the second the Castle kind of came up on the Rookie Roulette wheel, Tyler Rucker, my co-host on our weekly pod, immediately texted me. He's like, you got to get Matthew on. He's awesome. He does great work. So very excited for this one. All right. So with Castle and the Spurs, I would just kind of want to start big picture. And when he was the 4th overall pick, just what was your kind of initial reaction to the pick?
Yeah, I think that was there were a couple of players in there. Obviously, you bring up like Reed Shepherd, potentially Alex Sarr, but Castle was the one that really stuck out to me the most. And honestly, drafting him wasn't too big of a surprise. The Spurs like guys who win, straight up. They like the really competitive winners. They like the big bodies, the especially as they've moved toward this more, this term has gotten almost overused to a ridiculous extent, but positionless type of players. And he is one of those guys who at the college level you saw, or going all the way back to high school, the guy is a point guard. Coming into college, he's a little bit more of a wing and a combo guard. You were kind of wondering exactly what position he would play in the NBA, but I think the Spurs looked at his general skill set and they saw that he's capable of doing a whole bunch of different things on the offensive side of the ball. And then obviously we saw what he was capable of defensively, where he was just sort of a monster for UConn. So he really just fit the Spurs mold in so many different ways. So once he was on the board, and considering guys like Reese Shea and Sarr and Reed Shepherd were off the board, there was pretty much no question who they were going to be picking.
From kind of a draft standpoint, how much do you kind of dive into the nitty gritty of these guys before the draft and before they get into the league? Because Castle is a pretty polarizing prospect coming out of UConn, because the defense was awesome, the passing flashes, but it's like, all right, he's a 6'6" off ball wing guard who doesn't shoot and doesn't really score consistently. And I believe in his upside and potential, and that's why he was number one on my board. But there were others on the team who were much more skeptical and had him like mid to late lottery, because they, at least at the time, they didn't buy that upside. So from that kind of standpoint, how familiar were you with some of the holes and the narratives kind of surrounding Castle coming into the league?
Yeah, very. Especially with this Spurs team now and the way they've been rebuilding. Once the season ends, I am diving in, man. I'm watching hours on these guys. And Castle was my number one as well.
Love it.
I just loved everything about his game, from everything that we've already mentioned to the pace that he played with, the maturity that he played with. He just stuck out, and you looked at him and you were like, man, if this guy shot like 35% from three, he'd be going number one. Like I was pretty convinced of that. So I was really high on Castle. And yeah, to answer your question, I dive in pretty deep, as deep as I can. You guys do this year round and you do a great job. So like it's much more of a cram session for me. And I don't get a chance to watch everybody. It's kind of one of those, like, I'll look at draft boards and narrow it down to like 10 guys at this selection, 10 guys at another selection. So I have sort of an idea of what the draft board is probably going to look like whenever San Antonio is picking. Obviously, if they make trades, it kind of swings things in all different directions. And then I'll just kind of randomly look for guys that strike me, or catch my eye in one way or another. So I definitely do dive in and just, Tyler and I think we had like I think that podcast was like 2 hours long, but we were drooling over Steph Castle the whole time pre-draft. So yeah, I was very high on him coming in, and I enjoy this time of year because I don't really get a chance to jump into college basketball on a regular basis or watch it on a regular basis. So kind of once the conference tournaments start, and then obviously the whole March Madness thing, you get a chance to jump in a little bit more. And then after that, it's just trying to find as much tape on everybody as possible.
No, I love that, especially from like a team specific standpoint, because you're able to kind of narrow down a few specific guys, because depending on how the roster looks and what team you're looking at, it's like, this team doesn't need a point guard, so let's get rid of those 20 guys. And I envy that a little bit, because boards for each team would look so much differently. And then it's like when you kind of just have to do it in a vacuum of like, inevitably a lot of my stuff ends up looking really bad sometimes.
Well, it's just like every team drafts, every team has the other element to it is like, I know I've covered this team long enough and gotten to know it for over the last, it's crazy now, a decade and a half, that you know what they're thinking. You get a chance to talk to people before the draft, and like San Antonio does not give any hints about who they're going to be drafting, who they're looking at. You have to really, really do some work to even pry what their draft board looked like a couple of years ago, But it's one of those things that you do get an idea of what their war room, so to speak, is thinking on draft night. So I can also sort of look at these prospects and be like, okay, so the Spurs aren't actually drafting for fit. So like maybe there is, for instance, with Victor in town, like maybe there is a center. You're like, well, maybe they don't need a center, but no, they're not drafting for fit right now. They need all the talent they can get. So they might take this guy. They might be looking at someone like an Alex Sarr, whatever. You kind of get a feel for how they think along the way, so you can do your best to, like, what I try to do is, if I am doing any sort of big board, it's not like my own personal in a vacuum like a lot of y'all do. It is like, who are the Spurs looking at right now? Who kind of matches up with what they want to do.
Which, good luck with them.
True.
All right, so you mentioned that Castle is your top guy in last year's draft, and that he really fit that archetype of who the Spurs target in terms of personality and intangibles, and also on-court kind of skill set. How, if at all, has your kind of opinion from that time changed up until today?
Yeah, I actually think it's really cool to me whenever the stuff that you see from a guy on tape at the college level, like, really translates to the NBA. Like, everything that he's doing on the floor makes sense when you go back and you watch him from his time, and you kind of, even if you got your hands on any sort of high school tape, like all of the pace stuff with him, the well-rounded game, the defensive side, the basketball IQ, everything just translated so quickly, and it's been cool to see. I think that one of the things that you hoped, and with, like, you brought up Steph's 3-point shot and his free throw shooting, for that matter, and you kind of looked at it and you're like, man, I know there are going to be a lot of question marks. Like, is he going to be able to play off the ball if he's a sub 30% 3-point shooter? Is he really like a natural point guard? Is he kind of caught in between? Like, where are you going to put him? So it's actually been kind of cool and even refreshing for the Spurs, even though he's been very up and down from the perimeter, to see him have these nights where he gets hot, where he hits 5 threes or something like that. There's the I remember talking about this before the draft, where it's like, you look at his mechanics and you kind of say or write, like, they don't look that bad. It's like, yeah, we have all the data over here that suggests he's not a great shooter, but like, it doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, it's like if you cut the clip off before the ball gets to the rim, you're like, that went in, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, oh no, it almost never went in. Oh, fantastic, love that.
Yeah, so to see a lot of this stuff translate, but then to also get that added layer of, okay, and I think we did know this to an extent, like, he had the ability to get hot. We saw that at the NBA level with even more extended range. One of the things that's been really invaluable for San Antonio is he's basically become, I would say, their best driver of the basketball. Dribble penetration, getting to the line, something they sorely needed, and he took that mantle, honestly, pretty early. Devin Vassell is not a guy who gets to the line very much. Keldon Johnson, some games he'll get to the line a lot, but it's a little bit inconsistent because he is kind of a crash into guys, put the ball up there, doesn't get a ton of calls. But Steph is so crafty with it, and so willing to really just run up into guys. It took a little while and still does. He's getting a little bit of the rookie treatment when it comes to getting foul calls, but like, he, for the most part, other than Victor Wembanyama, like, he is the guy who gets to the line more than anyone else on the team. So it's been that was, I guess, not that you couldn't see it coming, but to see it happen so quickly, and to see him play with such a just lack of fear. He is unfazed by the level of basketball at which he's playing now as a 20-year-old. He knows he belongs, and he treats every game that way. Like, he thinks that he is good. You could tell he knows what he's capable of. He knows what he is, and that level of confidence as a 20-year-old at the NBA level on a team with guys who have already kind of started to establish themselves, like never mind Victor Wembanyama, but like guys like Vassell who got a big contract. Keldon Johnson's been around. You're on a team with Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul now, and still you're just unfazed by the idea of like, here's the ball. We need you to score right now. It's a close game, and we're putting the ball in your hands. And he's been unfazed by anything they've thrown at him.
I love that because I'm like just outside Minneapolis, so I get to go and cover a whole bunch of Timberwolves games, and I was at both of the ones that the Spurs were here, and the first one back in, was it like January or whenever that was, Castle played like 5 minutes, got in early foul trouble, looked like a deer in headlights. I was like, oh man, this sucks. Like this is not what I wanted to see from you. Like, all right, at least we got Victor out here still, but man, like, come on, this sucks. And then the second game just a couple weeks ago, totally different player. He's aggressive. He's getting downhill. We're seeing that like ability to change speed and direction in tight areas. In like the blink of an eye, really pop. And I think he had double-digit free throw attempts that game. He was defending at a high level, creating for others, just constantly moving. It's like, oh my goodness, this is aggressive growth for a rookie in a very, very short amount of time.
Yeah, I bring up the fact that he's unfazed. Like he'll have these nights where he's flatly bad. And Spurs fans actually will get mad at this stuff because like he'll be having a bad game, but they still just want to see him play through it. Mitch Johnson will kind of bench him. He'll play like 13 minutes the whole game or something like that. But it's like warranted. He's turning the ball over. He's making bad decisions with the ball. Rookie stuff. But then the next game he comes back. There's no like, he's not hesitant. He's not playing scared or anything like that. He goes right back to his game. And, one night he might have 4 turnovers in 13 minutes or something like that. Hardly plays. You might not even see him down the stretch in the fourth quarter or the second half. And the next night he comes out and it's 22, 5 and 4 or something like that. And like completely unbothered by the night before. And, you brought up some of the stuff that I think that's been most surprising to me. You don't really get the feel whenever I was watching tape of him, like you were more impressed by the fact that he just kind of plays at his own speed. He's not this lightning bug up and down the court. But then when you watch him on a nightly basis, you start to notice the little things like, ooh, man, that was a nasty little quick hitting dribble move in tight quarters. Oh my gosh, he just took his time, got to the basket, dunked on a guy off 2 feet, like exploded vertically to get there. And it's this stuff that you didn't or at least I didn't really see because I'm not watching full UConn games. I'm watching as much raw film as I can, like as much unedited stuff, like highlight package stuff. I'm trying to watch as much as I can, but it's still kind of in clip format. So you're not getting that full experience with this guy. But I've just been so impressed by his ability to get to his spots, get where he wants to go on the court with there is this level of quick pop that sort of belies his patient demeanor. And that's been one of the more surprising things to me, kind of a pleasant surprise from a basketball standpoint, because we all love the athletes, right? And San Antonio especially, because historically the Spurs haven't drafted a bunch of these like explosive athletes. So to see a Spur in the dunk contest was like rubbing your eyes like, wait, this guy's capable of this kind of stuff. And I thought he did great in the dunk contest. So it's like seeing a lot of this, the little things that I maybe didn't quite pick up on tape has been really, really cool to see. And I'm sure you guys feel this way too whenever you scout all these guys and you see them coming up into the NBA. It's always so cool to see that stuff translate. Like, I saw that when he was in school, and here he is in the pros doing it. Like, it makes sense. So to see the little added wrinkle the little added wrinkles of his game has been cool to watch.
Yeah, the athleticism and particularly the strength with him is
Yeah.
something that I felt like constantly got slept on during the draft cycle where you keep seeing these things of like, he's just an okay athlete. It's like this dude has like NBA strength and he's a month out of high school. Like he
Right.
is ready to go. And I feel like that aspect so frequently gets kind of slept on. And that explosiveness that we're seeing, and the one of the comps that I always used with like 99th percentile outcome, like everything goes right, you know, he becomes the ultimate version of himself. The one that I kind of kept going to was always Jimmy Butler because of
Mm,
that physicality, the defense, just all around versatility. But in that second game that I saw him too, the way that he was getting to his spots and getting low in his drives and exploding and changing direction, it was, I'm not saying he's going to be this player, so the name's gonna be a little aggressive here, but it reminded me a lot of kinda how SGA
yeah.
operates in the mid-range and explodes off of 1 foot in any direction and kinda gets wherever he wants and plays with that same type of physicality. Now, Castle's shot has a long way to go, the
Yes.
playmaking, the consistency, all that kind of stuff. But just stylistically, in terms of getting to the rim, getting to his spots, it's like, oh, there are a lot of similarities here.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like that's a big name, but when you use the word stylistically, like I think you're right. They both have that sort of patient demeanor. They know that they can get to their spots if they just set their guy up the right way, their defender up the right way. They have like the one of the coolest things of the Spurs season has been the introduction of Steph Castle's deceleration move, where
Yeah.
he's using that big body. Uh, Defenders have to load up and prepare for it, and he's just stopping on 1 foot before he gets to the basket, and they're kind of flying off of him, and he's just laying it in. Just little herky jerky, quick changes of direction, quick changes of pace that he has that is certainly reminiscent of the way SGA plays. And you're right. I would say that of all of the things that he has to work on, it's that mid-range game. He doesn't really have much of one. He kind
Yeah.
of, when he gets to his spot in the mid-range, it's kind of like a set shot. He doesn't really elevate and get that shot up, but these are things that I'm sure will at least develop along the way. You brought up his strength, and you earlier brought up the game in Minnesota. There was one play in there that was illustrative of that strength where he gets to the
Yeah.
basket, bumps into Naz Reid, who fouls
Just
him, and
sent him
Naz
flying.
goes flying into the first
Yeah.
row, and Steph is laying it up, and you're like, oh my goodness, like Naz Reid is not a small human
No, he's not.
being, and Steph Castle just kind of blew him off. And you're right. And when you stand next to this guy, you're like, Jesus, this guy's 20 years old.
Yeah.
This guy was in high school a year and a half ago. Yeah, he is already has an NBA body. And that sort of combination of power, quickness, strength, all of it's going to be a deadly package, I think, for a long time, especially as he begins to ramp up his efficiency.
So with Castle, I kind of feel like he's one of their main building blocks going forward.
For
Obviously, the
sure.
biggest one is Victor Wembanyama, but they also just made another big trade for De'Aaron Fox at the deadline. Now unfortunately both those guys are out.
Yeah.
Kind of tough to build chemistry when you're on the IR, but hopefully get better soon and boost that draft pick a little bit better.
Right.
So what have you kind of seen throughout this year with how Castle fits with both those guys and what the Spurs are trying to build going forward with those two guys kind of being the main core of their rotation?
Yeah, I think that we still need to learn a lot about how they all interact with one another. They've moved Castle sort of all around.
Yeah.
From he early in the season, he entered the starting lineup after Jeremy Sohan had gotten hurt, and then later moved him to the bench. And then he'd been on the bench for good, coming off the bench for good once they acquired De'Aaron Fox, and they actually kind of gave Steph that second unit as kind of his own. I mean, Keldon Johnson has found a perfect role for him off the bench, so it's also Keldon's there too, but in terms of lead ball handler. They kind of gave Steph the ball to run the show whenever Chris Paul and De'Aaron Fox are off the floor. And thus far in the sort of early stages of their on-court relationship, the De'Aaron Fox, Steph Castle minutes haven't exactly gone very well, but like I wouldn't read too much into that at all at this point. So it's a little bit difficult to tell, considering like they have, they acquire De'Aaron Fox, and then like 10 days later or whatever it was, the Victor the blood clot situation, the deep vein thrombosis happens with Victor, so he's out of the picture. Steph is coming off the bench for the remaining month or so that De'Aaron Fox was still running the show, and now De'Aaron's on the shelf. Steph is back in the starting lineup, so it's a little bit difficult to tell. I think obviously one of the areas that you want to see where you want to see Steph improve, and it hasn't really changed much since he came out of UConn, but when you have guys like De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama, who possess such, in Fox's case, that downhill dribble penetration gravity, in Victor Wembanyama's case, gravity anywhere he is on the court, you want a guy who's going to be able to space the floor. So the jumper, the 3-point shot is going to be critical for him. I think the bigger questions will come down the line when it's like, can Steph Castle and Jeremy Sohan play together? If you're looking for a defensive duo, like, you would love to be able to play those guys together, but it's probably going to be contingent on both at least becoming respectable shooters. And I would say that like Steph Castle has become a respectable shooter. Like, you have to guard him. He's more than capable of hitting it. I think they've given him such a green light to the point where we're like, Steph, like, we'll be watching and he's catching a ball with 14 seconds left on the shot clock from 28 feet and like letting it fly. And we're like, dude, probably relax a little bit here, man. And then he might come out of the game, but he's not lacking in confidence. But we see him after every practice shoot around, like he's working with Jimmy Barron, Spurs shooting coach. He's putting a lot of work in that capacity. So I think if that shot gets up to the point where it's like consistently around 35%, then I'm just not. I think everything else is going to take care of itself in terms of a fit with De'Aaron and Victor, because all three of those guys are so multifaceted that I think once there's a rhythm and a chemistry down to what they do, that everything's going to go smoothly. Because with Steph, like, you're looking at a guy who can initiate primary action, certainly secondary stuff off of Victor and De'Aaron. You want him to become a better spot up shooter, cutter, things that we saw from him at UConn. Maybe things get really weird when Wembanyama's in the lineup. Like, you started before he got hurt, or before this health situation arose, like, we saw some inverted pick and rolls with Victor handling the ball and Steph rolling and hitting off of short rolls, getting to the basket. Like, it was really cool to watch, and it's so bizarre watching Victor Wembanyama as the ball handler in pick and rolls, but I think they're just going to be able to use him in so many different ways. They already have. They're kind of like pressure testing him in so many different ways, but I just think that as long as that shot becomes respectable, then he's going to be just fine in any situation that they put him in.
And coming into the draft and even his freshman season at UConn, we knew the shot was the big question mark, the big concern with him. So far throughout the season, is that still your kind of biggest concern with him going forward, or has something else kind of popped up that has raised a few red flags or yellow flags maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that number one is going to be the shot. Like, you just want to see it become consistent, because if it becomes, and I'm not even talking about like him becoming some like 50, 40, 90 guy. I'm just,
Right.
Something where it's consistently a threat. I think that's the biggest thing. Number two for me, and this is all stuff that you can pretty easily like chalk up to, okay, he was a 19-year-old when his rookie season started. He's 20 years old now. Like these are the mistakes that are going to happen. But it's like some decision making with the ball in his hands. There have been some games along the way where you're watching, like, what are you thinking? What are you trying to do there? And you always like the sort of trying to see something a step ahead of someone else, but I think too often he tried to force certain plays that may not have been there. And then the other one for me would be the on-ball defense looks great at times, and they often do this, they often give him the other team's best player to defend. When you're a rookie and you're guarding these guys one-on-one, you're gonna get got at the NBA level. You have to learn all the subtleties of these players' games and watch film on them. And Steph does. He watches a lot of basketball, not just of his own defense on guys like whoever, like Luka, just to name someone, a Tatum, a Jaylen Brown. Like, he's defended so many different players this year. So not only does he watch his own film, but he watches the way other defenders throughout the league defend the best players in the league, the SGAs, the John Morants, like all these dudes that he's going to have to face for years to come. But I think he's held his own well enough in that regard, and you can only assume that he's going to get better defensively one-on-one. I think he's actually even surprised me how solid he is as a screen navigator. At his size, it's not really easy to snake your way around a lot of these screens when you're 6'6", 220 plus. But he does a really good job of that. I think the area defensively that I have been there is a little bit of a yellow flag for me, and I think, again, this will just come with time, but it's off-ball awareness, situational awareness, communication, listening to communication. Like, there are pretty much every game you can see different breakdowns from him on the defensive side of the ball, and I think that's where defensively we know what he's capable of doing. It was one of his biggest calling cards coming into the league. But I think the spatial awareness, off-ball awareness stuff is an area that he's definitely going to have to improve and just be more locked in. And it's always interesting to me whenever you see these guys who have this sort of sterling defensive reputation, you know what they're capable of. It's always interesting to me when those guys are given these bigger offensive workloads. Like, I think you can argue that he's had more responsibility on the offensive end this year for San Antonio than he had at UConn last year in a lot of ways. Definitely. They've asked him to do a ton of stuff this year. And so you always kind of wonder, I think I remember seeing this with Kawhi as he moved from, back-to-back defensive player of the year to number one option on the offense. He stopped being as effective on the defensive end. We saw it with DeJounte Murray, same thing. So you kind of wonder, at least I do, how much when you give him this giant role offensively, how much is that taking away from the defensive end of things? And like, he's too young at this point to be thinking along those lines. And as you sort of look forward, you're like, okay, at best, this guy's going to be the number 3 option on this team moving forward. And you could even argue, like, if Devin Vassell ever becomes consistent, like, maybe he's the number 3. Who knows? So I would like to see, I think, a little bit more of what was advertised on the defensive end when he was at UConn. And I think more specifically, as an off-ball defender. That would be probably my biggest yellow flag. The decision-making with the ball in his hand, you see enough just incredible flashes to be like, okay, the mistakes is just rookie stuff. He'll get over that. But yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more on the defensive end.
For sure. And, especially the last time that he had significant on-ball creation responsibilities was as a senior in high school, and
Right.
then kind of
Right.
taking that gap year as an off-ball wing at UConn, where it's like, all right, I just kind of have to do the bare minimum
Yeah.
on the
Right.
offensive end. It's like, oh wait, I have to relearn all this stuff and do it against NBA defenses. No issue.
Yeah. No
Um,
big deal there. Yeah.
what are your kind of expectations for him going forward, both kind of short term, so like for the rest of the season and kind of into the off season, and then maybe a little longer term looking.
Yeah, so they've stuck him back into the starting lineup, and he's playing essentially. I guess at this point he's the starting point guard. It's him and Vassell in the backcourt together. So I'm sorry, Chris Paul is the starting point guard, of course. Stephon Castle is playing off the ball. So I think it's like, okay, this is where it's almost come full circle, because it's not where he started the season, because at the very beginning of the year he was coming off the bench, but pretty quickly into the season Sohan broke his wrist, and he was shoved into the shooting guard spot. Vassell came back and slid up. So it's kind of full circle back to when he really started to come on. So I would like to see him continue to show improvement off of the ball, because this surge that we've seen from him, not just since the All-Star break, but really before it, um, a lot of this surge came when he was moved back to the bench and he was doing a lot of the initiating, a lot of running the show for that second unit. So I think it would be, and the Spurs would probably like to see him continue to grow his game and continue to show this efficient level of play as a starter off the ball, and do this against starting defenses and starting offenses, like reclaim that sort of that spot, I guess you could say, because in shifting gears going forward, like, this is the role that you are projecting he's going to occupy for the long term, playing off the ball, away from, of course he's going to have the ability to initiate offense. The Spurs are really trying to create an environment where whoever gets the rebound can just go. It's not grab the rebound, stop, get it to De'Aaron Fox. It is, if Castle grabs the rebound, go. If Vassell grabs the rebound, go. Same with Sohan. They're trying to install that sort of strategy and approach to the game. So he's going to have plenty of that. But we know that, like, you have De'Aaron Fox on your team to handle the ball and to be that sort of head of the snake. So this is the role that you're going to see him occupy for the long haul. And I think there are going to be interesting questions ahead, like, can he and Vassell play together? That's going to be a big question. So you want to see a lot more of that. Their paths in terms of the rotation have sort of crossed a whole bunch of times this year, because Vassell at the start of the season was still recovering from foot surgery. So he was coming off the bench for a while Castle was starting, and then they kind of flipped spots, and Vassell has been in the starting lineup really ever since. Castle has been coming off the bench for several months until recently, until the Fox, announcement that he's going to be undergoing surgery today, I think. Well, Tuesday, whenever y'all are listening to this. But I think that this is going to be what you want to see, is like little stuff. You want to see the chemistry that's developed between Vassell and Castle. You want to see him continue to grow as an off-ball player, or just sort of multifaceted offensive and defensive player, and just continue to kind of, when you don't have Fox and you don't have Wembanyama, you kind of just want to see the personal growth at this point. So just continuing to build off of what he's been doing, and maybe down the stretch of games, like, put him in charge, like, see what he's made of. And they have been doing that during a lot of points in this, many different stretches during the season. And I just think you want to see the continued growth. And put as much on his plate as you possibly can, because like up to this point, he's shown that he can handle whatever's been thrown his way. So like I said earlier, just keep pressure testing the guy. He's learning incredibly quickly. And this is a team that really is going to be wanting to hit the ground absolutely running next year, so long as everyone's ready to go. And the Spurs are still very optimistic about Wembanyama's health. They're getting the surgery for Fox now so that he's ready for offseason stuff. So that's the plan. Better be ready to go to start next season. So put him in a role that you kind of foresee him playing next year, and let him continue to build off it.
As we kind of wrap up here, I know you haven't done your deep dives into all these draft guys yet.
Yeah.
But as we kind of look forward to the 2025 draft, this might be one of the last times that the Spurs have not just one but two pretty high picks. Now, a month ago, that was a little more on the fence as they kind of looked to be making a push for the play-in. Injuries be damned. But now they're kind of like, oh, how high can we potentially get here? So, kind of as you look forward to the draft, are there any names or prospects or archetypes or anything that you're excited about, looking forward to, think would be a good fit, etc.?
Yeah, so I think I'll go the archetype route at this point, because frankly, like I don't think that, and who knows what happens with, trades or consolidating picks or whatever, but like the Hawks are playing well. With everything that's going on around the Spurs, like they're still only 2 games back in the loss column of the play-in. They just beat the Pelicans the other night. It's like one of these things where it's like, I don't know where they're gonna end up. They really can't finish any higher than 8th. So the conversation about the top of the draft, unless they get lucky in the lottery, which I mean, we just saw Atlanta get lucky in the lottery, so you never know. Who knows if they're going to be in that top 4 area? But I think with the archetype, you're still drafting best player available if you're San Antonio. Like, obviously, you want someone who's going to fit with Wembanyama, and obviously to an extent with De'Aaron Fox, because you just traded for the guy. You're going to extend him, all of this stuff. But you're still looking for best player available because you need to acquire talent at this point. It's not about fit. You're not one player away from making a title run right now. So I think number one at this point is spacing. You need shooters. The San Antonio has a number of shooters, but the majority of them are streaky. You don't have the consistent night in and night out 40% guy that is a mainstay in your rotation that you're going to be able to count on. I think they need size and rebounding. They have been woefully thin up front, and I think most people would say backup center, someone to back up Victor. I'm even talking about someone who could potentially play alongside him, and just bigger bodies up front, whether that's at the 4 or the 5. And by the way, I am hoping that you might steer this ship to point out some prospects that off the top of your head might make sense. But I think that they're still looking for, as I mentioned earlier, they want this positionless approach, these guys who are capable of doing a ton on the court. It's why they drafted Jeremy Sohan. It's why they, one of the reasons, obviously, that they drafted Steph Castle. You could even go back to the Joshua Primo pick. Like, they were looking for a guy who they thought could play off the ball, play on the ball, all of this stuff. So they've been drafting this way for years now, looking for the players that can kind of do anything that's asked of them on the court. But in terms of archetypes, I would just say that they need spacing and they need size. They need interior presence on the glass, and it wouldn't help to have a shot blocker to back up Victor when he goes off the floor. But yeah, I think size and shooting is their biggest need. Their 2 biggest needs right now.
Well, with the shooting, I love the Con Knipple fit from Duke. Really strong, really versatile, solid second side kind of creator too, more than just a shooter. And then Liam McNeely, again, you got that size, shooting, feel, passing, rebounding. Weirdly enough, I feel like we kind of keep doing this in our mock drafts too, but like around that 10 pick, if the Spurs are there and Derek Queen is still on the board, I feel like we keep
Yeah.
putting him there. It's bizarre. It's weird. I think it'd be a lot of fun though.
Yeah.
And then I like the kind of Colin Murray Boyles fit with Victor specifically, but again, his shot is huge question
Yeah.
at best, and he's I've heard from NBA people where they're not totally convinced about how tall he is,
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
he probably won't be able to play with Sohan at all. A little redundant there, but
Yeah.
just looking at Victor, it's like, oh man, that's fun, especially defensively with their
Yeah.
hands and feel and IQ. And then just a couple deep cuts. Nick Clifford, Colorado State, Rasheer Fleming, St. Joseph's, size, shooting, off ball stuff. All right,
Man,
so
there is a guy who's been in my mentions. I can't tell you how many times, telling me that the Spurs and like wanting me to send his messages to the front office, telling them to trade up to number 2 to draft Colin Murray Boyles. So he's gonna love. Because I swear to God, it's the quotes have been like he's gonna save Victor's career. He's gonna save the Spurs. And so if he listens to this podcast, I'm sure he's going to love hearing you bring up CMB.
I don't think they'll need to trade up to 2 to get him, at least based on what the NBA people I've talked to. Right. He's got such a funky game. I really like him though.
Yeah.
What he measures at will be a fascinating kind of outcome though.
Can't wait for the combine, man. It's every year.
Last thing with the Spurs, and then I promise to let you go. I've taken up enough of your time, but what is just one thing with this team at large? It doesn't have to be Castle specific. It can if you want it to be, but that you feel is really interesting, exciting, intriguing, bizarre, weird, undercovered, whatever you want to, whatever path you want to kind of go down.
Yeah, I think that so many of the storylines have stalled with Victor Wembanyama going out and De'Aaron Fox going out, and one of the things that I've been really interested in watching and has been, and this is just in my mind, but watching these guys who have been here for years, like I brought up Keldon Johnson a couple of times, but like a few years ago, he was the number 1 option on this team. He was averaging 22 points a game. He, like Castle, has been thrown all over the place over the last couple of years in all these different roles. And over the last month, he's just putting together one of the best stretches of his career, one of the most efficient stretches of his career. He's playing some of the best defense of his career. He just looks comfortable in this slot coming off the bench, in this role coming off the bench. So it's been cool to see these guys who, the Spurs hope will play a role in the future. It's been cool to see these guys mature and adapt to the point where like you have a guy like it's tough when you're on the same team. And this is something Mitch Johnson, actually, I asked him about this the other night and he brought it up. It's different if let's say you are on one team and you're the number 1 option and you're averaging 22 points a game, and then you go to another team and you have to fall in line with whoever's there. This is on the same team, and he's watching guys that have been brought in or drafted sort of take his spot in the pecking order, and he's just kind of slid down with grace, and he has remained a team leader and all of this. So it's been really cool to see a guy like Keldon Johnson figure things out and sink into this role and really like embrace it, and embrace it as not just a player, but a locker room guy and a leader of the team. Same with Jeremy Sohan. Like over the last 2 years, I feel like he's only played his natural position for like 2 weeks. He's played everything from starting point guard last year to backup center now that Victor Wembanyama is out, playing behind Bismack Biyombo, which is just crazy. So to see Jeremy Sohan, who was very frustrated last year with the point guard thing, like came out publicly, you don't really see Spurs players do that very much. And he
Yeah.
came out publicly and said, this sucks. Like, I don't want to do this. I'll do it, but I don't want to do this anymore. But he has really started to, in talking with him this year and even talking with him the other night, like he has grown into this mindset of like, you know what, I actually learned something from that point guard experience, which by the way is what the Spurs had hoped. They never planned on him being their long-term, point guard. They wanted him to learn more as a basketball player. He's kind of like a ball of clay. They wanted to keep molding him. Same thing with playing the center position. Like he's learning that aspect of the game now too, and he himself has embraced that stuff. So those are kind of the storylines that like nationally no one's going to care about, but I find it really interesting, especially just considering what this team is going to look like going forward and like who they're going to be able to continue to pay and all this stuff as the roster builds even more with all the draft picks still to be made. And then lastly, I think the big one is like, is Greg Popovich going to be back next year? I think that's a huge one right now. And I think it's a storyline that regardless, unless he makes a decision early, is going to be sort of hanging over their head for a while over the summer. So is Greg Popovich going to be back? One of the things that he has said over the last couple of years is like, I want these guys, when it's time to make a push for a championship, I want them to be ready to do so for whoever it is who's going to follow me and take them there. So he's essentially saying, like, once they're ready to go, I'm not going to be the guy who's going to do it. It's going to be someone else. So, like, where is this team in his mind? Does he feel like he didn't finish the job, so to speak? Because he suffered the stroke only 10 days into the season. And so it's been Mitch Johnson all year. It's going to be a really interesting storyline to follow. Is Pop just going to come back at 76 years old? Is Mitch Johnson going to just slide back in as the lead assistant? What's going to happen there? Is this is a 76-year-old who is thankfully is doing well health-wise? Like, is it going to be the best decision to come back into a high-stress job, flying all over the country for 7 or 8 months? Like, just a lot of question marks there, but I do think that on top of obviously making sure that Victor Wembanyama is healthy, that's number one. But number two, and a pretty close number two, is like, is Greg Popovich really going to come back? He said he hopes to coach again. So that's all we know at this point.
Matthew, that was fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time. Everyone, you can go follow him at Matthew_Tynan. Handle will also be in the description. Go check out his work. He does fantastic stuff. Matthew, thank you so much for the time.
Man, thank you for having me on. It was a good time.